The empathy plague. The tram was running a few minutes late. The air was taut, like before a thunderstorm. Autumn in Melbourne smelled of wet asphalt, cut grass, and the exhale of tired people. In the evening rush, no one noticed when a man at the edge of the platform suddenly stopped and pressed a hand to his chest. He looked about 40, neat suit, leather briefcase, graying temples. He stared ahead as if searching for someone, but his gaze was unfocused. And then, suddenly, a tremor distorted his face. He closed his eyes, and a single tear slowly rolled down his cheek. Next to him stood a girl with headphones. She was smiling at something on her phone. Their worlds, it seemed, had no reason to intersect. And yet, the man was staring directly at her. He whispered, almost inaudibly, I don't want to die. Please." The girl turned, startled. She hadn't heard his words. She had only felt something tear inside, as if someone else's fear had flared within her. She took off her headphones and looked at him, noticing for the first time how close he stood. Too close. At that moment, someone screamed on the opposite side of the platform. A young man, about 20, clutched his head and sobbed, silently, convulsively. An elderly woman beside him grabbed her chest. Two teenagers glanced at each other and quickly stepped back. One of them whispered, "That's not my fear. It's not mine." Panic began. Some people ran for the exits. Others just froze. But the main thing was in their eyes. People looked at one another and saw too much, felt too much, as if an invisible wall between them had cracked and thousands of foreign emotions came flooding in. That night, dozens of patients were admitted to hospitals with the same diagnosis, acute emotional disorder. And in the morning, Professor Andrew Davies first heard of what the media called mirror syndrome. He didn't yet know. It was only the beginning. Dr. Andrew Davies had never complained about silence. His office at the Institute of Neurocognitive Research at the University of Melbourne was a sanctuary. White walls, orderly shelves, neatly stacked journals, the smell of coffee and paper. This was a place where emotions were analyzed, not experienced. That day, as usual, he was reviewing digital case files, patient reports from various clinics. A sudden spike in consultations over the past 2 weeks. The symptoms repeated: abrupt anxiety attacks, uncontrollable empathy, obsessive sensations of feeling what others felt, with no external triggers. Nearly everyone described it the same way: an intrusion. "It looks like a shared hallucination," he muttered, making notes. "But then where's the trigger?" He scrolled to the next case, a 40-year-old woman, an accountant. At work, she felt a sharp pain in her shoulder that belonged to a coworker. That colleague had, in fact, recently injured it. Then came a panic attack in the elevator next to a man suffering from claustrophobia. Andrew leaned back in his chair. It didn't make sense. How could someone feel what hadn't been spoken aloud? A knock at the door. It was Jody, his assistant. "The patient from Mind Clinic is asking to see you again," she said. "The one who claims he hears thoughts through people's eyes. He broke down sobbing when a nurse smiled at him." "Let him in," Andrew nodded tiredly. "We don't turn away those who suffer." 5 minutes later, a young man sat before him, hollow-eyed, trembling. He couldn't speak coherently. He just kept repeating, "It's not mine. I feel it, but it's not mine." Andrew, as usual, began listening with clinical distance, but something shifted. The boy's monotone words echoed inside his own body, like a signal bouncing off bone. A tremor passed through his fingers. His breathing caught. His heart began to race. "It's not mine," the boy whispered again, staring at Andrew as if hearing something in him too. Andrew felt a strange mix of pity and fear, not for the boy, for himself, because he already knew what the boy meant, but he pushed it away, blamed it on exhaustion. Maybe he had absorbed too much. He dismissed the patient and turned off the recorder. The soft click restored the room's sterile calm, but not his own. That night in Melbourne was windy. Andrew couldn't sleep. He got up several times, drank water, checked his phone, tried reading. Inside, there wasn't anxiety, just emptiness. And it was this emptiness that unsettled him the most. Around 3, he put on his coat and stepped outside, not thinking, just walking. Half an hour later, he stood across the street from the house where his ex-wife lived. No lights in the windows. Trees in the yard swayed softly, like breath. He hadn't planned to ring the bell, just stood there, until he felt it, not pain, not longing, disconnection, like a thin pane of glass between them, unspoken but real. He didn't hear words, but he knew. The door was closed, for good. He turned and walked back. The wind slapped his face, and for some reason, it brought relief. Almost his own feeling. He didn't yet know that from this moment on, he had become a conduit. The Mind Clinic was located in the northern part of Melbourne. A gray building with no signage, frosted windows, and a silence that felt more like a library's than a hospital's. Andrew had never liked the place. It felt saturated, as if the walls absorbed the patient's suffering and echoed it back in whispers. He walked down the hallway behind Jody, who moved slightly faster than usual. She spoke quickly, almost stumbling over her words. We've divided the patients into 2 wings, one for classical psychotic disorders, the other for those who claim to feel what isn't theirs. How many? Andrew asked. As of today, 47, almost triple in a week. The staff's overwhelmed. Some of the nurses have started complaining of side effects. She paused, clutched her clipboard a little tighter. Then, suddenly, she stopped, turned to him sharply. You're afraid, she said unexpectedly, as if she herself didn't know why. Andrew frowned. He hadn't said a word, hadn't flinched, just stood there, silent. Only that low, constant pressure inside, the kind he hadn't admitted even to himself. What? He asked softly. Sorry, Jody looked down. I don't know. It just felt like something. He didn't respond, just walked past her. But something stung. She hadn't sensed his words. She had felt his state. They entered the observation room with its one-way glass. Beyond it, a worn-out communal ward. People sat on cots without speaking. Some rocked back and forth. One man just stared at the floor, as if terrified to lift his gaze. In the center, a woman in her 50s whispered, "His teeth hurt. The girl wants to die. That one fears fire." Some started reacting even through surveillance feeds, murmured the on-duty doctor nearby. We shut down the cameras in 3 wards. One intern broke down after a night shift, said the children were looking at him from inside his own head. Andrew stared without blinking. Something was wrong. He suddenly felt the woman trembling in the far corner, physically, viscerally. He hadn't heard her, hadn't seen her face, but his stomach clenched in panic and his palms broke into a sweat. He stepped back. "Who was the first?" he asked. Jody nodded toward a girl against the wall, sitting with her eyes closed, as if in meditation. Pale skin, arms scratched raw. According to the staff, she was calm until others were placed nearby. Now she cries constantly, and everyone who spends time with her ends up infected. "This isn't an epidemic," Andrew murmured. "It's resonance." He didn't understand what he meant, but something inside him stirred, a quiet certainty that whatever had awakened no longer needed speech or touch. It passed through presence alone. MRI scans, neural maps, behavioral records, interview transcripts, all lay before Andrew like pieces of a puzzle no one dared assemble. Nearly every infected patient had interacted in some way with a single person, Mia Lin, 19 years old, an artist, diagnosed with mild autism and heightened sensory sensitivity. One line in her medical history glowed in Andrew's memory. Suicide attempt at age 14. Mother's note, she always said she couldn't understand why people smiled if inside they felt dark. The phrase stayed with him. He imagined a girl who absorbed others' pain as if it were her own and couldn't understand why no one else seemed to notice. Mia had been moved to an isolated block of the clinic where the windows were darkened and the walls padded. She didn't speak, didn't make eye contact. She only drew, in charcoal on recycled packing paper the nurses gave her. The drawings were disturbingly precise. Faces twisted in grief, bodies bent in pain, children with empty eyes. When Andrew entered, she didn't turn. She kept drawing as if she already knew he was there. "Mia," he said gently, "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand." Silence. He sat across from her, leaving a table between them. On it, dozens of sketches. One made him freeze. It was him. His face, tense, frightened, bleeding from the eyes. In the corner, scrawled in fine pencil, "You're already inside." He clenched his fingers. "What do you feel, Mia?" She looked at him for the first time. Her eyes held no tears, but they held noise. Deep, ambient noise, like a signal in an empty channel. She said, "Everything, everyone, always." Her voice was barely audible, but in Andrew's mind it struck like a blow. She wasn't begging, she wasn't dramatizing, she was stating a fact. He understood. She wasn't the source, she was the portal. Her brain, under the pressure of a severe emotional rupture, had become a conduit, a neural network without wires. No internet, just raw sensation, just pain. And all the others were merely receivers. She looked at him again, long, calm, as if she weren't seeing his face, but his depth. "You're the closest," she said, "because you're not shielding yourself." Andrew didn't know what to say. He just nodded, and for the first time felt not fear, not pity, but a sharp, human loneliness. At first, it seemed like coincidence. In Tokyo's Narita airport, a man from Sydney, passenger on flight QF79, suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed to the floor without a sound. Later tests showed no signs of heart attack, but 3 nearby travelers began gasping for air, panic overtaking them with no known cause. A small child, not his own, whispered, "That man's scared, and now I'm scared too." An hour later, the footage hit the internet. Within 6 hours, thousands of reposts and comments. Some viewers wrote, "I suddenly felt like I was falling too." On Twitch, a popular streamer known as Dream Chaser started his broadcast as usual, joking, coffee in hand. 20 minutes in, he went silent, staring into the camera. Then, suddenly, he began to cry. His body trembled. He repeated, "This pain isn't mine. This pain isn't mine." He never explained whose it was. The stream continued for 10 more minutes before he cut the feed, covering his face. But the viewers didn't leave. The chat exploded. "I can't breathe either. Feels like someone I love just died. I don't know why I'm crying." The video reached millions in a day. People started calling it a digital contagion. In London, St. George's Hospital reported a strange anomaly. Doctors complaining of phantom pain. One surgeon refused to enter the OR, saying, "Someone else's fingers are shaking inside mine." Physicians began requesting painkillers, not for patients, but for themselves. Not physical, emotional. No virus, no bacteria. Only eyes, only screens, only attention, and one human vulnerability, the need to feel what another feels. What had begun in Melbourne had no borders, because emotions never did. At first, they were just spikes, local overloads in schools, subways, offices. People bursting into tears without reason, freezing under a weight of pain they couldn't trace. But within a week, the system spun out of control. Melbourne fell silent. Shops emptied. Traffic vanished. Classes were cancelled, not from panic, but from stillness. People avoided each other. Any contact could be a trigger. Any emotion contagious. Andrew sat in his office, scanning global bulletins. Stockholm, a mass suicide in a monastery. Tokyo, chaos in a business district sparked by a single man's brief. Sao Paulo, drivers stepping out of their cars and standing in the roads, weeping. He didn't feel alone. Quite the opposite. He felt too much. In the past days, his head had become a chamber of borrowed voices. His body responded to pain he couldn't identify. He no longer knew when he was hungry, angry, afraid. Everything came from elsewhere. Sometimes he caught himself wondering, do I love anyone? Do I miss anyone? But he couldn't answer. Every emotion inside him belonged to someone else. His own, if they still existed, no longer spoke louder than the rest. He could feel someone rejoicing in Cape Town, someone losing a child in Manila. But when he tried to recall what he himself had once felt, he hit silence. He went to see Mia. She sat unmoving, as always. "Did you ever feel something of your own?" he asked. Silence. Then, softly, without changing posture, "I did, before the silence began." Andrew sat across from her. He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. When your mind contains thousands of voices, your own becomes a whisper. Then it fades. "You're an amplifier," Mia said. She no longer drew. She only stared at the wall. "You don't just feel, you transmit." He understood. The circuit was closed. His brain had become a relay, like a radio, receiving signals and spreading them further, instinctively, without will. "Is this the end?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's a birth." He left the room, deaf to the sounds around him, but sharply aware of the doctor in the hallway holding back a scream, of the nurse hiding tears, of someone behind a closed door clutching a loved one's hand, not theirs, someone else's, already indistinguishable. Humanity had become one body, but skinless, unfiltered, nothing but nerves, raw and fused together. The question was no longer how to stop it. It was whether anyone could survive the first breath of this new consciousness. Andrew stood in the hangar on the city's edge, a former military lab where neurostimulation equipment had once been developed. Now it was empty, just him, Mia, and the device that could change everything. The emitter was crude, an experimental prototype originally meant for treating PTSD. It suppressed mirror neurons, temporarily disabling empathy so a patient could survive proximity to another's pain. Back then, it had seemed reckless. Now, it was the only way to save humanity from itself. Mia sat in a chair, wrapped in a blanket. She looked exhausted but calm. Inside her, silence had long since settled. Not because there was no more pain, but because it had become the background, like breath. Andrew stared at the console, a metal panel, one lonely white button, simple, fatally simple. "If we activate it," he whispered, "people will be separate again, no connection, no feeling." Mia said nothing. She just watched him. He stepped closer. His hand trembled. Inside his mind, a storm of voices, fragments of feeling, like a broken symphony. Pleas, terror, despair, love. Not his, but sinking deep. He no longer knew if anything inside was truly his. "If you do this, you might lose everything," he said finally. His voice was uncertain, even to himself. Mia rose, slowly, stepped toward the panel. Without breaking eye contact, she answered, "I already have. You haven't yet." He wanted to stop her, to say there had to be another way, but he couldn't, because she was right. She laid her fingers on the button. "You're too close, Andrew," she said gently. "You can't end it. I can. And she pressed it. In that instant, silence. Not outside, within. The voices vanished, the pain receded, as if the world had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Mia recoiled as if from a sudden chill. In the distance, sirens began to wail, ordinary ones, mechanical. People fell to their knees, not from fear, but from aloneness. Andrew remained at the console. He didn't cry, he didn't think, he simply stood, feeling the emptiness settle inside him. He knew he had done the right thing, and he knew the price was real. Melbourne woke to silence. Real silence. Thick, heavy, almost frightening. Cars rumbled again. Coffee machines hissed in cafes. Children argued in schoolyards. But it all sounded like background, like scenery. The main thing was gone. People had stopped feeling each other. Empathy hadn't vanished, not completely. Polite concern remained. The habitual, "How are you?" The mechanical, "Hang in there." But the depth had gone, as if someone had cut the invisible wire through which raw, unfiltered emotions once flowed. Andrew sat on a bench near the university building, a cup of long, cold coffee in hand. He watched students walk past. Their faces were calm, too calm. In their eyes, private worlds, detached from one another. He tried to sense something, not words, but presence, vibration, that subtle current of connection that once needed no explanation. But inside, there was only stillness, as if he had become alone again, or for the first time. Jody approached and sat beside him. They sat in silence for a moment. "How are you?" she asked. He smiled, a real smile, but without weight. "People tolerate each other again, that's something." "They don't remember, do they?" He shook his head. "No, just a faint trace, like a dream that felt real but vanished the moment you opened your eyes." From the university doors, Mia emerged, alone, no blanket, no escort. She walked slowly, as if relearning how. In her hands, a canvas. But it wasn't blank anymore. It was covered in a thin layer of gray, like ash or an erased drawing, as if someone had tried to wipe away an image that no longer existed. Not a picture, but a residue. She looked at Andrew and didn't smile. She simply nodded. He nodded back. She knew he remembered. And he knew she was the only one who still felt. When she turned the corner and disappeared, he saw the canvas again, not with his eyes, but in memory, in absence, in silence. He stared at it, searching for the hint of a line. But, like in himself, he found nothing anymore.